Okay, wrestling fans, it's time to get back to PennLive's wrestling podcast. The first one Jimmy Carlson and I, Bob Flounders, are doing in the month of March. So that's exciting. But the fact, Jimmy, that it is March means we are very, very close to the start of the college wrestling postseason. We're recording this on Wednesday morning, beginning this weekend at Northwestern University, Evanston, Illinois, not far from Chicago, one of my favorite cities. Jimmy, you're going to be out there. Penn State and everyone else has been off for a couple of weeks to kind of get fine-tuned. When we last saw Penn State, they were making very quick work of American. No surprise there. But we've had some time to kind of go over the postseason. I know you were up Monday for Cael Sanderson's availability. He had some interesting things to say. You heard from some wrestlers. So as we look at the Big Ten tournament, where would you like to start?
Well, at the top, as be 9 Big Ten teams are ranked among the top 19 teams, Bob. Okay, so that's 9 of 14.
Right.
In the top 20, basically.
Yeah.
So Penn State, of course, will be looking to qualify each of its 10 guys. If it doesn't, then all the talk about matching Minnesota's 2001 accomplishment of placing all 10 guys as All-Americans will be for naught. But that's a story for next week.
Mm-hmm.
If the Lions get all 10 through, which they should. All right, but with wrestlers from 141 through 285, ranked number 1 and number 2, it's pretty safe to say those 8 are going to make it, barring injury or illness, of course. And then I think that Luke Liljedahl at 125 and Braeden Davis at 133 will make it because there's 7 at 133. I think there's 8 or 9 at 125 qualifiers.
Mm-hmm.
They'll have to have strong tournaments. They're pretty tough weights in the Big Ten there, but they need strong tournaments not only to place highly, but to generate confidence and momentum. I think for the NCAAs, for they're a couple of young guys. Although Davis has won the Big Ten last year as a freshman, and that's exactly what Cael Sanderson thinks will happen. He and the staff prepare all season for the postseason moments. And in fact, here's a quote from Monday after saying that everyone is healthy. He says, "Our guys have always competed really well in the postseason, and I think they have a lot of confidence in that." He said, "There won't be an exception this year. Our guys are going to go wrestle great. They're going to wrestle well at the Big Tens, and they're going to wrestle even better at the Nationals. It's going to be fun." Are you going to argue with that?
I don't know that I could. I've listened to Cael more than a few times this year. He's always on point. The track record is the track record. Before we look at some of the weights and get to some of the comments from some of the wrestlers that were made available Monday in State College. So, Jimmy, as someone who's followed him for such a long time, not that I'm aging you, what do you think it is, though, his track record for producing outstanding, like great regular season teams that can turn it up a notch or two in the postseason? I know that the room is loaded with great workout partners from former Penn State wrestlers, and former world champs are in there, and that certainly helps. But I think there has to be more to it than that. What do you think it is about Cael? It just seems like Penn State believes they're going to get better. The guys that maybe have something to prove coming out of the dual meet season almost always prove it in the championship season against really, really, really good wrestlers. Is there one or two things that stand out to you about how Cael and his staff, it's not just Cael, and his conditioning staff, how they get their guys ready to peak at exactly the right time?
Well, with 11 titles in 13 years, their philosophy is working, right? And I think that, as he says every year at this time, and sometimes, they get made fun of about the having fun concept, but, his wrestlers keep saying that. But it starts at the very beginning of the year. And he said that again this week, that
He did.
the postseason, you don't get ready for the postseason a couple weeks out after the American match, for example. You start getting ready for the postseason in October, when practice starts. And it's just the prevailing attitude of they will get better. They know they're going to get better, and they will peak at the right time. And it's ingrained to their heads. And again, with the workout partners and everything else, but that's the plan with that program, with that coaching staff. And that's what they follow. And it's certainly been working. That's for sure.
Yeah. But just, when you hear that, I think, when you're a wrestler and you've been off for a couple weeks and then you hear from your head coach about how much he believes you guys are ready to really hit the next level. I think mentally too, I think that there is, like, sometimes that gets overlooked, Jimmy, the mental aspect of peaking at the right time, of believing you're going to wrestle your best match, because the margins are so thin, right? When you get to the best wrestlers in the country, it usually comes down to one or two, I won't even say mistakes, it's one or two sequences that you either convert or you get converted on. And that's normally what's going to happen the deeper you get into the postseason. So I think all of it works together. I'm sure Penn State fans, if they heard that from Cael, they know that he feels like he's sitting on a full house, if you will. But let's just turn it to the actual Big Ten tournament at Northwestern Saturday and Sunday. 2-day tournament. Finals late Sunday afternoon, and super late, given it's in the Midwest. It'll almost be dinner time when the finals, I think, are going to go off, I guess, on the Big Ten Network. So, Jimmy, when you look at some of the weights, one of the things I wanted to ask about just very quickly is just the health, and maybe what Cael had to say about the one wrestler that's really not quite been himself for pretty much an extended period of time, Braeden Davis. So just your thoughts on him and maybe the weight that he's at.
Well, it's interesting with Davis. Like I said, he won Big Tens last year at 125 as a true freshman. Gets to the NCAAs, earns the number 1 seed, yet he doesn't place. He lost to Richie Figueroa, who was the eventual champion by, I believe, a takedown. Maybe it was a point. And he lost to Jor Volk from Wyoming by a point. And it was, I think he learned a lot there. And then, of course, this year, then he tweaks a knee early on. He's in and out of the lineup, comes back, tweaks it again, Cael said this week. But now he's calling him, he says he's looking good, feeling good. He says Davis will be the best and healthiest he's seen since before the season started. And he added that that Davis tweaked that knee again in his first match back. But he says he doesn't think that it's going to affect Davis' time off the mat. He says history shows that sometimes guys being off the mat ends up being a blessing. So, I think it will be a challenge for him. But again, agreeing with Cael there, I think he will bring that energy that's needed to get through that. Maybe not going to say he's going to win 133, but, he will be able to qualify, I believe, if he stays healthy.
Yeah, Jimmy, certainly not an easy weight. Some of the names that are at that weight that have had good seasons, he's going to have to make a run, a pretty good run. He's going to have to beat some good kids. So we'll see how Braeden does. It's the PennLive Wrestling Podcast. We're talking about the Big Ten championships out in Northwestern, Chicago area, Evanston, Illinois. One of my favorite road trips of the Big Ten during the football season. Jimmy, you're going to be out there, I think, seeing family. I know you're going to have a good time. As we look a little bit further at this tournament, before we get to some of the wrestlers that you've heard from, this actually ties in pretty nicely. So I think one of the storylines of the Big Ten championships this year will be just kind of what happens at 141. Just because of who's in it. The eventual national champion is probably going to come from the Big Ten. Bo Bartlett is very much a solid contender. But there are some very good wrestlers in the Big Ten in this tournament. And I'm not just talking about Mendez from Ohio State. I believe Bo had his hands full with the kid from Nebraska, Brock Hardy, in the dual meet. But Bo is undefeated, and he is a veteran wrestler. He knows what it's like to compete in the postseason, but so does Mendez. What did Bo have to say about maybe this year compared to maybe last year when he did beat Mendez in the dual meet, but then went 0 for 2 in the postseason, and it cost him the national title?
Well, this will be the 6th time that they will have wrestled. I think Matt Brown and I was Mike Evans from Cumberland Valley years ago might have wrestled 8 or 9 times in their careers. But Bartlett said there are technical things to work on, such as how you finish a certain single leg shot or how he wants to wrestle on top. But the key, he said, is presenting his best self. He's a lot like Messenbrink in the philosophy part of the sport. he also knows that Mendez will be making adjustments as well. So
Yeah.
it's a chess match, and it'd be an interesting one at that. But there's also Vance Baumauer from Minnesota. He will add competition along with Hardy, as you mentioned. And this is Bartlett's final Big Ten tournament. And he says he tells the younger guys that he went 1-2 in his first Big Ten tournament, didn't qualify for the nationals. The year after that, he was wrestling at 149. He got to the NCAAs, but he went 1-2 as well.
Yeah.
His point to the younger guys was that time flies, and younger guys should just concentrate on improving over each season, which is what Bartlett has done.
All right. Well, that to me is, I know that's going to be, if wrestling fans, not just the wrestling media, had to circle 3 or 4 bouts that they were looking forward to see the most out at the Big Tens, I think a potential pairing, maybe in the finals, between Bartlett and Mendez would be circled. So let's just move it along just a little bit and just talk about 149 and 157 together. So Shane Van Ness, at 149, he had an interesting Big Ten season, right? He got tripped up, I think, in a dual meet against the Nebraska kid. But he came back guns blazing down the stretch. Had probably one of his signature wins against Cael Parco in the dual meet at the Bryce Jordan Center on January 1st. Your thoughts on that, but also Tyler Casack, his health. And that isn't necessarily the easiest weight class, I think, in the Big Tens. His one lone loss was an injury default to Ethan Miller of Maryland. And that match, I think, was only 1-0 at the time. And that kid is still unbeaten. So when you think about those two weight classes and the Penn State kids, where do your thoughts go?
Well, I think Van Ness, certainly will have the rematch with Ridge Lovett, and possibly with Dylan D'Amelio as Ohio State as well. And of course, Cael Parco. So depending on the brackets, we'll see where where that competition goes. But I do think his January match with Lovett was a bit of a hiccup. I mean, not to take anything away from Lovett, he wrestled very well that night, but you don't often see Van Ness on his back where he ended up that night, and I don't expect to see that again. Van Ness is pretty driven, and turning the tables on that bout would not surprise anyone. I sort of tend to think that he will, but of course it will be difficult. I also think when he gets to Parco again, I'm just not sure that Parco's jumped levels enough to get the best of Van Ness. But that's what makes this tournament so interesting, because I'm sure he would probably disagree. And then 157, of course, Casack, in concussion protocol during the Michigan-Maryland weekend, missed a couple of bouts, came back wearing the headgear with the padding over the forehead, which was pretty smart. Bob, if he can keep from having his eyes gouged and his head cracked, he should be in pretty good shape. But I've never seen somebody get their eyes poked as many times this season as Casack has. But Ethan Miller is very good. Ja'Cory Teamer will be out for revenge. If you recall, Casack beat Teamer in the dual meet. He was holding him in the air when the clock was winding down, able to thrust the number 1 sign while he still had him in the air. It was one of the iconic moments in Penn State wrestling. A lot of great pictures came out of that. But Cael called Casack a big moment guy. He loves to compete, and he'll have to do that for sure.
Yeah, looking forward. I think that could be an interesting weight, and I do think that Casack, just watching him a couple of times and listening to the way he talked after I think it was after the Iowa match, I'm sure he also is looking forward to maybe seeing Miller again, just because even though he was ahead, technically it's a loss, and he seems like a guy that gets motivated pretty easily. Right. Maybe something to watch there. Anything from Messenbrink? I know you had a chance to talk to him up there. Did he shine a light on anyone else, whether it's Levi Haynes or some of his workout partners? Just a very interesting guy to talk to. Penn State fans, there are some colorful people in that wrestling room, and not just on the mat, off the mat as well. They all kind of march to the beat of their own drummer, but they're all really sharp kids. And some of them, you just never know what you're never going to get, whether it's Bartlett or Messenbrink or even Carter, but they always have something interesting to say.
Well, there's one clear-cut favorite in this entire tournament, Bob. It's Messenbrink at 165. In my opinion, it's the weight class that's the thinnest on talent, and there is the most dominant wrestler in the country at that weight, and that's Messenbrink. So his finals, probably will against Mikey Caliendo again from Iowa, and he
Yeah.
teched out Caliendo on January 31st. But Messenbrink, ever the philosopher, right, will have none of that. Doesn't pay attention to expectations. He said the end goal, he said, must be intrinsically motivated, and that you only feel expectations if you were putting them on yourself. And he said the only expectation he puts on himself is to give his best effort, right? So as the country's leader, like I said, in technical falls, and he's in third place in the country's most dominant wrestler category, he certainly does that. And Haynes, of course, will be favored at 174. He's had competitive matchups with Ohio State's Carson Harshla, Iowa's Kennedy to some extent. Nelson Brands wrestled at 74 for Iowa against Oklahoma State, so the Hawkeyes lineup will be a talking point. But Messenbrink was asked about Haynes this week, and he related an interesting story. He said when he's being recruited, Messenbrink, they sat in the practice room bleachers and spoke with Haynes. And interestingly, he and Haynes had wrestled some freestyle earlier, and Messenbrink had won. But he said Haynes was very kind to him, saying that they really wanted Messenbrink to transfer in from Cal Baptist. Messenbrink said then, and he went on, Haynes said a lot more things, but Messenbrink said he went back to the top of the bleacher, sat down next to his father, and said he's coming to Penn State. And that's how that story unraveled, right? So, and Messenbrink added that everyone in the room shares the common goal of getting better, back to Cael's philosophy. And he said that speaks to the decisions of the coaches on who they recruit, and they see the why of the guys, why they want to come to Penn State, what they want to do when they get here. I think Bob Messenbrink might be a counselor someday. Who knows?
Yeah, and I think he said earlier in the year he wants to relocate to State College once his athletic career is done. So he must really, really enjoy the environment, probably being around the room, and he's a lot of fun to watch. Jimmy, we got a couple more weights to get to. I don't want to overlook by at all. We're talking about a guy like Carter Strachey going for a fifth NCAA championship at 184. He's unbeaten, has been very rarely tested, at 184. He kind of had the injury default out of 174, I believe it was last year, as he dealt with a knee injury he suffered late in the regular season, and he still found a way to win a championship. Really, I don't want to say on one good knee, but he didn't have two good knees, and that to me is an incredible story. It's just Carter is one of one. But I don't know if you have any thoughts on that weight, but I just think 197 with Josh Barr and who he's up against and who he's already faced is a very compelling weight. And also at 285, I think barring a big surprise, the two best wrestlers in the 285 class nationally are probably going to meet in the final. Kirkliet, I want to make sure I get that right. Greg Kirkliet, unbeaten for Penn State, and Gable Stevenson from Minnesota. They've met before. I guess the question is how much better has Greg gotten, maybe, to give this guy a very stern test. But when you think about maybe the last two weights or any thoughts on Strachey, have at it.
Well, the last three are must-see TV, Bob, and Strachey is in second place in the most dominant wrestler category behind Oklahoma State heavyweight Wyatt Henderson. And I don't know if you knew this, but Strachey's won 87 straight matches. Now, the record books will not show that because the two losses he took last season by medical forfeit in the Big Ten tournament when he was rehabbing that knee stopped his winning streak at 64. So his official streak is 23. But in the last 87 matches he's actually wrestled, he's won them all. And now he's attempting to become the NCAA's only five-time national champion, perhaps the only five-timer, unless their eligibility rules change or we have another world pandemic, whichever comes first. Okay? So, then there's Josh Barr at 197, also in the top 10 category for most dominant wrestler. And he's a good bet to have back-to-back rematches with Michigan's Jacob Cardenas in the semis and Iowa's Stephen Buchanan in the finals. Buchanan has been very impressive all season, will be a huge challenge for Barr if that rematch occurs. And of course, the Big Ten Network, usually ESPN wants, they switch the order of the finals. They want some of the better matches at the end. They've had Taylor Dake at the end in various years. And anyway, the Big Ten doesn't have to switch this year because Kirkliet and Gable Stevenson The heavyweight, undoubtedly, that will be the finals matchup. Stevenson, a two-time NCAA champ, of course, the 2021, postponed from 2020 Olympics champion, gold medal winner that year. He's on a collision course with Kerkvliet. Stevenson defeated Kerkvliet at the NCAAs 3 years ago, and after a stint with the MMA and a try at Buffalo Bills, he found some second semester eligibility this year with the Gophers. Decided to come back, and he's rolled to win after win. He has 63 straight wins, Bob, while Kerkvliet has 36 straight. Stevenson's only 2 losses in 98 career bouts came to Penn State's Anthony Cassar in 2019. So think about that. It was 6 years ago.
Yeah.
All right. So who will win? I mean, clearly you have to give Stevenson the edge, right? He's beaten Kerkvliet twice, although that was many years ago. But he doesn't appear to have lost his edge. And Sanderson said that Kerkvliet just needs to be Kerkvliet, to compete freely, be himself. He called Kerkvliet a student of the game, always playing with different technique and tried to advance what he's doing. And he said he's gotten better each year he's been here. Imagine that, since he followed Cael Snyder here from Ohio State. He never competed for Ohio State, but he was enrolled before he transferred. And I spoke with Minnesota coach Brandon Eggum on Tuesday, and Eggum called Kerkvliet, great competition. He said the plan now is to make sure Kerkvliet is reacting to what Stevenson is doing, not the other way around. And he said they want Stevenson to control all 3 areas, wrestle at a very high pace. And Eggum said Stevenson wants to make it a very physical match with lots of energy and lots of action. So in my opinion, it'll be about 430 pounds of big-time athleticism rolling around for about 7 minutes. And it should be a lot of fun.
Yeah, the two. I don't know if Jimmy, you know better than me. When the last 2 weights, the two heaviest weights, the big boys, when those are the ones that could be the highlights of the Big Ten championships. I don't know if I want to say if it's rare, but when you talk about the athleticism of these big bodies, I think that is rare. Is that safe to say?
It does, and it tells you just how athletic the heavyweights are becoming this year. With the 285-pound limit, it took away from some of the bigger guys like Jimmy Jackson over the years and Chris Taylor. That was a long time ago. And they were huge. They were 400-pound guys, and they were 1-0, 2-1, things like that. But not to say there's not 1-0 or close matches in heavyweights anymore, but they're much more athletic and a lot more fun to watch.
All right, Jimmy, I only have one thing left for you on this edition of the PennLive Wrestling Podcast. Bob Flounders here with Jim Carlson. Jim will be out in Evanston, Illinois this weekend for the Big Ten Championships. Penn State will be well represented, the number 1 team in the country, 15-0 during the regular season, winning very, very impressively. They've got a wrestler that's hopefully healthy now in Braeden Davis, but I'm just gonna put you on the spot here just a little bit, not a lot. There's 10 weights here, and I'm gonna give you time to start to think about this. At the end of Sunday's competition, how many champs will Penn State have?
I'm gonna need 10 seconds here, Bob.
All right, yeah. I'm just gonna say I'm not talking about. I mean I know they're gonna be really, really well represented at the Nationals in Philly in a couple of weeks, but when you look at some of these matchups, I mean, I think you can pencil in Penn State for a few. But my question is, I mean, and this is with an eye towards maybe a wrestler maybe being a little bit of a surprise. Maybe it's at 197. I don't know. But when you look at the entirety of the weights, all 10, if I put you on the spot, what's your number of champs coming out of Evanston for Penn State?
I say they come home with a 6-pack of titles.
Woo! All right. This will be fun to revisit this next week, but 6, huh? All right. Well, we've already gone about 26 minutes, but I can, when we sign off here, I'll be going through them, but 6 is an easy number to remember. Hey, Jimmy, have a great time out in the Midwest. I know you'll be busy, but I know how much you love actually covering the sport. So hopefully there's no bad weather out there. I don't want to mush you, but this has been another episode of PennLive's Wrestling Podcast. We focused on the Big Ten Championships. We were hopeful to get a guest on this week, but there were some difficulties. He's a busy guy, but we won't mention his name, but he's a guy that I think the fans will really enjoy hearing from him once he's freed up. Jimmy, good luck to you in the Midwest, and we'll be back next Wednesday, hopefully, to talk about how Penn State did.
We'll be here.